What's happening, fam? John here from AF Anime, back again with another One Piece manga review, this time for chapter 1042, which is titled The Victor Needs No Epithet. And that's a catchy title for an amazing chapter, as this chapter we get a lot of action, a little bit of story, and a decent amount of hype as well. So the trend continues of us getting amazing chapters week to week, and thankfully it doesn't seem like it's going to slow down anytime soon. So if all those breaks we had within the past couple months led up to this, then I'm perfectly fine with it. So I'm excited to get into the recap, review, and discussion for this video, but first, as per usual, we are going to get into the cover story. So this is a continuation of the Germa cover series, and as you can tell from this page, we're still in the exact same location as we were for the past few. So we can see that Oven has the book up on his shoulder and has a question mark, which seems to indicate that he's kind of curious about the actions of Pudding. Now this is interesting for a couple reasons. The first of which I can think of is that this might indicate to some of the family members that Pudding's feelings for Sanji may actually have been a bit more genuine than they initially thought. And off the bat, that does come across as troubling for Pudding, potentially, since Oven doesn't necessarily strike me as someone who's stupid. However, at the same time, as I've mentioned in the previous video, I do think one of the most redeeming qualities about the Big Mom Pirates that makes them a little more likable is the fact that they do have this love and concern when it comes to their family members. Now, we gotta imagine that Big Mom and most of her kids are still pretty peeved at the Straw Hats for what they did, but there may be certain characters who may come to understand or sympathize with Pudding's situation. And to be honest, I do still believe that Pudding is going to be the one to eventually set Niji and Yonji free. And the easiest route to that path would be if one of her siblings explained to her that they actually stayed behind and fought so Sanji and the rest of the Vin Smokes can escape. And if that does happen, you gotta imagine she's gonna sympathize with her quote-unquote almost brother-in-laws and eventually set them free. And as I've said, this story is pretty slow going, but ultimately it can take its sweet old time if it means us spending some more time with the Big Mom Pirates, as I do find that a lot of those characters are in fact likable. In any case, now we can go ahead and move on to the chapter recap and some discussion. The first page of this chapter starts off with a bang, as we see that Drake has stabbed the remaining CP0 member through the back with his rapier. Now off grip, we're kind of given the impression that this attack would be fatal, and we get a little bit of dialogue between the two characters, which is kind of telling when we hear that Drake explains himself by saying that this is what his justice wants him to do. Then we get a response from the CP0 member, which raises a couple questions. His response being, "Then I envy you." Within the past couple chapters, we've seen a little bit of personality creeping through this character a good deal, but this response in particular kind of gives me the impression that this person may have a more complex sense of morality, while at the same time either having a loyalty to the world government or a fear of not doing what he's told. Now, I do have some thoughts about that, but we'll get into that later. For now, we see that he uses the technique Soru to free himself from Drake's blade, and then turns around and uses the finger pistol technique to put Drake down and out for the count. Now, it could just be a setup for us to have some cool lanterns in the background during the conclusion of the fight on top of Onigashima, but my honest opinion is that in the near future, when Kaido or Luffy sees these wishes of these people, it will probably have some effective change on how they're acting or how they view the situation. Suppose we'll have to wait to see if the events of the Fire Festival have any effect on the rooftop, as that's where we go for the next part of the chapter. And we can see that Kaido is still eating the barrage of attacks from Luffy in his Gear 4th Snake Man form, and they seem to be pretty effective. And we even get a little bit of inner thought from Kaido trying to figure out exactly how Luffy is attacking in this manner. And even though this situation appears to be fairly serious for Kaido, it is immediately undercut with some comedy when we are treated to this gemstone of a panel. And this is why I love One Piece. Even though we're caught up in some amazing intense action, when I saw this panel I genuinely laughed out loud. And just for the sake of avoiding a cringe moment, I'm not going to sound it out the way I heard it in my head, but this is another one of those moments that I can't wait to see animated. Moving on though, we do get a line from Kaido that kind of gives off the indication that he might also possess a form of advanced observation haki. And using this observation haki, he avoids Luffy's attacks, gets in close to grip him in his teeth, and he begins to spiral high into the sky, and when he does so, he puts Luffy inside of his mouth. And once he reaches a comfortable height, he looks down and then he shoots Luffy out of his mouth, following it up with a blast breath. And the panel work for this sequence of events is just amazing. But Luffy gets shot all the way down through the bottom of Onigashima, and before he can hit the ground, he transforms into Bound Man and then zips back up to ascend to a height higher than Kaido. And after narrowly avoiding a big chomp from Kaido, we get a little bit of dialogue of Kaido kind of demeaning and trash talking the people of Wano and the samurai. And as Kaido is charging up another blast breath, Luffy gets in a named attack, which is called Overkong Gun. The attack lands and causes an explosion inside of Kaido's mouth, which sends him down to the ground of Onigashima. Luffy tries to follow up, but before the dust can settle, he uses a named move of his own, which is called Thunder Bellow Bagua. And as per usual with all the Thunder Bagua attacks we've seen so far, this one also was clad in Conqueror's Haki and damn near knocked Luffy out of his Gear 4th form. Then after that, we see that Kaido has moved on to another form or another state of drunkenness, which is known as his bloodthirsty state. So Luffy manages to hang on and rationalizes that it's time for him to go all out with one last attack against Kaido. Kaido also sees this happening and charges up another Bellow Thunder Bagua. And it looks like we're about to reach the conclusion of this amazing fight, but we do get a twist before this chapter ends. That CP0 member that Drake had stabbed has finally made it up to the rooftop to complete his mission. And as Luffy's winding up for another Overcon gun, he uses the Iron Body technique to grab Luffy's arm, effectively giving Kaido an opening shot in a similar fashion to Oden in his flashback. Speaking of which, once he sees CP0 interfering, Kaido immediately flashes back to the whole Oden situation. And then after connecting the attack against Luffy, you see a look on his face that kind of implies that he is not too pleased with the situation, even though it might have just led to him defeating Luffy. Now, although we aren't given the confirmation that Luffy is down and out for the count since he's still in his Gear 4th form, but that is actually how we end the chapter for 1042. Now, overall, this chapter was absolute fire. I'm going to give this chapter a rare 10 out of 10 because we get a good amount of action, a good amount of story, a good amount of hype, and even some callbacks to previous moments in the series. Not to mention, we also have some amazing artwork for this chapter, so in terms of story, art, hype, everything is on 10 when it comes to this chapter. Now I suppose it's time for a little bit of discussion, but I think the first thing we can do is give Drake some credit. He didn't really last that long in the grand scheme of things, but ultimately he did have some effect in delaying CP0 and their actions that would interfere with the Straw Hats and their success during this raid. I mean, we only get a couple panels of him throughout this chapter, so I won't spend too much time talking about that, but that does bring up the next point of discussion, which is going to be the CP0 member, or at least the last remaining one who's still standing on Wano. Now, we can't pretend to know where this character is going to go going forward, but we can assume one thing: it's very likely that he is going to die in order to complete his mission there on Wano. As we know with Kaido, when it came to that old lady who interfered with his fight with Oden, he actually killed her. I mean, we know this for a fact because her devil fruit is now in the hands of Bon Clay. And with the dialogue that we got from this guy in the previous chapter, 1041, he flat out stated that it was pretty much a death wish to interfere with Kaido's fight. Now, I know that when it comes to CP0, a lot of us have probably just seen them as kind of tools for the world government. They haven't shown a whole lot of emotion, but with this guy in particular, for this chapter and the previous one, he does manage to show a decent range of emotions and not just be so dedicated towards doing whatever the world government instructs him to do. So with that being said, I would be incredibly interested to see exactly how this guy's story plays out before the end of Wano, if he isn't just flat out murdered by Kaido for his interference. And if he is, that would also spell a lot of trouble for the situation at hand, because that would mean that the world government is losing its influence in Wano, or at least the weapons trade aspect of it. And on top of that, they lost 2 CP0 members in the events of Wano. That would just make this event so much bigger and make the world government so much more on edge in terms of how the situation turns out. And I guess I can briefly talk about the situation when it comes to Kaido's drunken states. At first, I kind of thought it was just a writing ploy to kind of slow things down or even dial back the seriousness of the fight so that way they could save it for the big conclusion, which could be 20 or 30 chapters from now. But when it comes to this chapter and the drunken states that we get, I thought they were both hilarious and kind of scary when it comes to his bloodthirst mode. Now, I may have said this before, but I don't really watch the anime when it comes to One Piece. I know that they're currently in Wano, and honestly, there isn't a big gap between the current chapter and the episodes that are coming out on a weekly basis. That being said, once this arc is done and finished in the anime, I cannot wait to see all these drunken stages playing out in a smooth video-based narrative. And as entertaining as that's going to be, the fight will be even more entertaining. Like I said earlier in the review, that attack with the blast breath that Kaido did to Luffy, sending him all the way down through Onigashima, I think that was one of the most smooth written combination attacks that I've seen in One Piece in quite a while. And I guess another thing that I do want to talk about real quick is the fact that Luffy is getting a lot better when it comes to using his devil fruit and his haki. Now, this is something that's been horribly obvious when it comes to Wano and the story throughout, but I think the way that he applied his Gear 4th in this chapter was just impressive to me. I honestly forgot that Bound Man can fly, and despite us seeing Snake Man when it came to the Katakuri fight and us believing that to be his strongest form, ultimately it is practical for certain situations for him to try to finish a fight in his bound man form, which he was going to do for this chapter. And then we had the dialogue from Kaido, or the inner dialogue, where Kaido implies that his technique with Snake Man doesn't necessarily apply to the properties of rubber. And given the fact that the devil fruit that Luffy ate was considered to be so important to the world government and Shanks, it raises some questions. But more on the Gomu Gomu no Mi at another time. The last thing I want to talk about for this chapter review is going to be the twist that we got at the end of this chapter. The CP0 member interfering with Kaido's fight in the same way that the old lady with the Mono Mono no Mi ended the fight when it came to Oden and Kaido. Now, my initial assumption here is that Kaido's just going to wail off and kill this dude the same way he did to that old lady. But I am interested to see exactly how this plays out, even if he does kill the guy or if he just lets the guy go. I don't think he's going to take that as a victory against Luffy, nor do I think he would use this opportunity to finish Luffy off in the same way that he did Oden. Now, to be clear, I am still a fan of the idea of Luffy defeating Kaido 1v1, and I kind of partially hope that's how it goes down, but this could change the narrative of how this fight with Kaido and Luffy is going to end. Maybe it might end without Kaido attacking Luffy at all, maybe it might end without Luffy attacking Kaido. Heck, I think it's possible that it could even end with Kaido declaring the world government enemies, seeing as how they might be considering Luffy a bigger threat than him. Just food for thought, I suppose, but that's going to end my discussion here. Let me know in the comment section down below what your favorite part of the chapter was, or if I missed anything, or if there's any generic conversation about this chapter you guys want to hold, just drop it in the comments below. Also, if you guys enjoyed this video and made it all the way through, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. I'll be back again very soon with another One Piece related video. Thank you guys very much for tuning in. My name is John from AFA, and I'll be back in the next video.